Imagine stepping into a room where every eye turns to you, not out of curiosity or kindness, but judgment and suspicion. For Jasmine King, this was her daily reality, a classroom not just filled with desks and books, but with hidden prejudices and unspoken tensions. The bell echoed through the halls of Westfield High, signaling the start of another day. Miss Roberts, known for her no-nonsense approach, stood at the front of her classroom. Her sharp gaze swept over her students, and as the last few stragglers hurried in, a new face appeared in the doorway. Jasmine King stepped into the room. Her backpack slung over one shoulder, she calmly walked towards an empty desk, feeling the weight of her classmates' eyes on her. Some were curious, others wary. Miss Roberts's eyes, however, hardened as they fixed on Jasmine. Well, Miss Roberts said, her voice sugary sweet but laced with underlying bitterness. It seems we have a new addition to our class. I do hope you can keep up with our rigorous curriculum. Her words, seemingly polite, carried a distinct undertone of doubt and judgment. Jasmine felt the sting of it but remained composed, offering nothing more than a polite nod as she sat down. Miss Roberts's lips tightened into a thin line before she turned back to the board. In that moment, a storm was quietly brewing, one that would soon shake the very foundation of this classroom. The tension in the room, though subtle, was palpable. Jasmine had entered a battlefield disguised as a classroom, and the war was just beginning. Tensions simmer beneath the surface, unseen but always felt. In classrooms like these, the power struggle between teacher and student is more than just academic. It's a battle of wills, with far-reaching consequences. The day continued as expected, with Miss Roberts leading the discussion on Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. She scribbled on the whiteboard, her back to the students, as they copied notes in silence. But Jasmine couldn't help but notice the subtle glances from her classmates. Some were curious about her, others indifferent, but a few seemed to enjoy the silent exclusion Miss Roberts imposed on her. They smirked when she raised her hand and the teacher deliberately ignored it. Jasmine, however, was not one to be easily discouraged. When Miss Roberts asked who would like to start the discussion on the themes of power and oppression, Jasmine confidently raised her hand. She had studied the book thoroughly and felt prepared to offer her insight. But Miss Roberts, her gaze sweeping the room, deliberately skipped over Jasmine. She called on other students, each giving their thoughts but none delving into the racial themes that Jasmine had found so profound. Finally, when most students had spoken, Miss Roberts turned to Jasmine with a cold, tight smile. "Yes, Miss King, do you have something to add?" Jasmine sat up straighter in her chair. "I believe the novel shows systemic racism." "Systemic racism?" Miss Robinson cut her off with a sneer. "My dear, I think you're confusing this classic American novel with some modern political agenda." The silence in the room was deafening. A ripple of unease passed through the class, but Jasmine didn't back down. She took a deep breath, keeping her tone steady. "With all due respect, Miss Roberts, the racial injustice in the book is a reflection of the time it was written." Miss Roberts's smile never reached her eyes. "That's quite enough," she said dismissively. "Perhaps you should focus on understanding the text as it's written, rather than imposing your own interpretations." The exchange left the room heavy with tension. Jasmine clenched her jaw, refusing to let the frustration show on her face. The silent battle between student and teacher was far from over. The storm was building, and Jasmine wasn't backing down. What happens when a teacher's prejudice collides with a student's quiet strength? For Jasmine, every day was a test of resilience, and Miss Roberts seemed determined to see her fail. The following days passed in a blur of subtle exclusions. Every time Jasmine raised her hand, Miss Roberts would slide her gaze past her as if she were invisible. The message was clear. Jasmine's voice had no place in this classroom. Some students began to take notice, exchanging uneasy glances when Miss Roberts ignored Jasmine. A few even shot her sympathetic looks, but none were brave enough to speak out. Others, however, seemed to thrive off the teacher's behavior. They whispered behind Jasmine's back, casting smug, sidelong glances her way. Jasmine felt the weight of it all, but she remained composed. She sat at her desk, scribbling notes with precision, her pen moving steadily across the paper. This was her quiet act of defiance, a refusal to be silenced or diminished by the teacher's bias. Miss Roberts, however, wasn't done. Towards the end of the week, she announced a group project, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "I'll be assigning the groups," she said. "We wouldn't want anyone to feel out of place." Jasmine's eyes narrowed slightly. She recognized the challenge for what it was, another attempt to push her aside, to isolate her. But she squared her shoulders, meeting Miss Roberts's gaze head-on. If the teacher thought she could break Jasmine's spirit, she was sorely mistaken. As the class filed out, Jasmine gathered her things slowly. Just as she reached the door, Miss Roberts called out, "Miss King, a word." Jasmine turned, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, Miss Roberts." The teacher's smile was thin and sharp. "I hope you understand that in this class, we focus on facts and analysis, not personal opinions or agendas. I'd hate to see you struggle because you can't separate your feelings from the curriculum." Jasmine held her gaze, her voice calm but firm. "I understand perfectly, Miss Roberts. I look forward to demonstrating my analysis skills in our next discussion." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Miss Roberts staring after her, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. The battle wasn't over, and Jasmine wasn't backing down. When injustice is overlooked, it grows. What started as subtle exclusion was now escalating into a full-blown battle, one Jasmine had no choice but to fight. The days following Miss Roberts's warning passed slowly, each lesson feeling like a new test of patience for Jasmine. In every class, the teacher's actions became more blatant. Every critique, every offhand comment was aimed at her, though Miss Roberts masked it behind a veneer of professionalism. During a reading exercise, Miss Roberts called on every student but Jasmine. When Jasmine raised her hand, Miss Roberts ignored it, as if she didn't exist. At one point, when Jasmine contributed her thoughts about a passage in To Kill a Mockingbird, Miss Roberts smiled coldly and said, "It's quite charming that you think that, Miss King, but we need to stick to more scholarly interpretations." The comment cut deep, but Jasmine held her ground. She refused to let the hurt show on her face, even as a few students stifled giggles. There were sympathetic glances from some corners of the classroom, but they felt distant and unhelpful. Jasmine was on her own. At lunch, Jasmine sat alone at her usual table. Her mind replayed the morning's events. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Miss Roberts was deliberately trying to make her doubt her own intelligence, her own worth. But Jasmine was determined not to give her the satisfaction. Suddenly, Sarah, a girl who often sat at the front of the class, approached her. "Hey," she said hesitantly. "I just wanted to say, I think what Miss Roberts is doing is wrong. It's not fair." Jasmine looked up, surprised. Sarah was one of the few students who didn't seem to enjoy the spectacle Miss Roberts created. She seemed genuinely concerned. "Thanks," Jasmine said quietly. "It's hard, but I'm not going to let her get to me." Sarah smiled sympathetically. "I don't know how you do it, but I admire your strength. If you ever need anything, I'm here." Jasmine nodded, appreciating the gesture, but she knew that in the end, this was her fight. The quiet battle between her and Miss Roberts was far from over. The line between education and oppression was wearing thin. Jasmine knew it was only a matter of time before Miss Roberts would try something drastic to push her out completely. As the following week began, Jasmine entered the classroom with a sense of foreboding. Something was different about Miss Roberts today. Her eyes were sharper, her posture even more rigid than usual. Halfway through the class, Miss Roberts made her move. "Class," she announced, "we'll be having group presentations next week. I expect everyone to bring their best work. Miss King, I assume you'll have no trouble preparing for this." Jasmine raised her head. "I'm ready for it, Miss Roberts," she said, her voice calm and confident. Miss Roberts smirked. "Good. I'm looking forward to seeing how well you handle this. After all, it's important to rise to the occasion, don't you think?" The challenge was clear. Miss Roberts wasn't just looking for a presentation. She was preparing to make Jasmine fail publicly, to humiliate her in front of the class. But Jasmine had faced bigger battles before, and she wasn't going to back down. Over the next few days, Jasmine threw herself into the project. She stayed up late, working meticulously on her analysis of To Kill a Mockingbird, focusing on the themes of racial injustice and moral courage. She knew Miss Roberts would try to find fault with anything she presented, so she made sure every point was backed by solid evidence and thorough research. The day of the presentation arrived. Jasmine stood in front of the class, her project board behind her, her notes neatly arranged. Her heart raced, but she steeled herself for what she knew was coming. Miss Roberts sat at her desk, her pen tapping against her grading sheet, watching Jasmine like a predator waiting to strike. "Whenever you're ready, Miss King," Miss Roberts said, her tone dripping with condescension. Jasmine took a deep breath and began her presentation. She spoke clearly, her voice steady, laying out her analysis with confidence. But as expected, halfway through, Miss Roberts interrupted. "Miss King, don't you think you're overemphasizing certain aspects of the novel?" Miss Roberts said, her eyes gleaming with malice. Jasmine paused, her brow furrowed slightly. "I believe the racial themes are central to understanding the book's message." Miss Roberts smirked. "I see. But shouldn't we focus on the broader literary merits, rather than dwelling on certain political interpretations?" A ripple of unease passed through the classroom. Everyone could sense the hostility in Miss Roberts's voice. Jasmine felt her hands tremble slightly, but she steadied herself. "With all due respect, Miss Roberts, I've backed my analysis with textual evidence and scholarly sources. Ignoring the racial themes would overlook a significant part of the novel's impact. Miss Roberts stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She strode to the front of the room, positioning herself between Jasmine and the rest of the class. "Let me make something clear, Miss King. This constant focus on race is not only misguided, but also disruptive to the learning environment." The room fell silent. The air was thick with tension. Jasmine stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest, but she refused to back down. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let Miss Roberts take it from her. There are moments when silence is louder than words, when standing your ground becomes an act of courage. For Jasmine, this was one of those moments. The rest of the class sat in stunned silence as Miss Roberts continued her tirade. Her voice rose, accusing Jasmine of disrupting the class, of being insubordinate, of refusing to conform to the rigorous academic standards of the school. Jasmine's heart raced, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel the weight of the humiliation pressing down on her, but she wouldn't let it break her. Not now. Miss Roberts turned to face the rest of the class, her arms crossed over her chest. "Students, I want you all to understand that in this classroom, we focus on facts and academic rigor. We do not indulge in personal agendas or political ideologies." The implication was clear. Miss Roberts was painting Jasmine as the problem, the outsider, the one who didn't belong. Jasmine took a deep breath, her voice calm but resolute. "Miss Roberts, I respectfully disagree. The themes of racial injustice in To Kill a Mockingbird are as relevant today as they were when the book was written. Ignoring them does a disservice to the author's intent." Miss Roberts's face twisted with anger. "Your attitude is bordering on insubordination, Miss King. I suggest you take your seat and reflect on whether you're truly prepared for the academic standards of this class." Jasmine gathered her materials, her shoulders heavy with the weight of the moment. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, some sympathetic, others amused. But she refused to show any sign of defeat. As she sat back down, she knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. Sometimes, the quietest moments are the ones that carry the heaviest weight. When the world seems to conspire against you, support often comes from the most unexpected places. As Jasmine sat at her desk, the weight of Miss Roberts's words still hanging in the air, she felt alone. The classroom, once familiar, now felt like enemy territory. The eyes of her peers bore into her back, some curious, others indifferent, and a few filled with silent sympathy. But none of them spoke up. Jasmine fought to keep her composure. She didn't want to cry, not here, not now. Instead, she focused on her notebook, her pen moving across the page, though the words she wrote didn't make sense. It was her way of keeping her mind occupied, of not letting the injustice crush her spirit. As the class ended, students began to file out, some shooting glances at Jasmine as they passed her desk. She gathered her things slowly, avoiding eye contact, not wanting to meet the stares. She felt a presence near her and looked up to see Sarah, her eyes filled with empathy. "Jasmine," Sarah began, her voice soft but firm, "I just want you to know that not everyone agrees with Miss Roberts. What she did today, it wasn't right. I'm sorry I didn't say anything in class. I didn't know how to." Jasmine shook her head, offering a small, tired smile. "Thanks, Sarah. I know it's hard. I appreciate it." Sarah bit her lip, clearly frustrated with herself. "I'll do better next time," she promised. With a nod of understanding, Jasmine shouldered her bag and left the classroom, her mind spinning. Though the support was small and quiet, it mattered. It reminded her that she wasn't entirely alone in this fight. When injustice is met with silence, it grows. But every storm has its breaking point, and Jasmine's fight was about to draw in forces she never expected. The days after the incident with Miss Roberts were tense. Jasmine kept her head down, focusing on her work, but the tension in the air was palpable. She knew Miss Roberts wasn't done with her. The teacher's thinly veiled hostility simmered beneath every interaction. Every time Jasmine raised her hand, it was ignored. Every comment she made was met with condescension. But Jasmine wasn't the only one who noticed. Sarah had begun speaking up more in class, subtly pushing back against Miss Roberts's biased treatment of Jasmine. Other students, like the quiet ones who had watched from the sidelines, were beginning to question what they had witnessed. Some whispered among themselves, exchanging glances of discomfort when Miss Roberts made another snide comment or slighted Jasmine in another way. One afternoon, as Jasmine sat at her usual lunch spot, a group of students approached her. She recognized a few of them, Sarah, of course, and a boy named Aaron who usually sat in the back of the class. "Hey, Jasmine," Aaron said, sitting down across from her. "We've been talking, and we want to help." Jasmine blinked, surprised. "Help with what?" Aaron glanced at Sarah, who gave him an encouraging nod before he continued. "With what's happening with Miss Roberts. It's not right. And we've all been too scared to say anything. But we shouldn't just let it happen." Sarah chimed in. "Yeah, we're thinking of going to the principal. What she's doing to you, ignoring you, belittling you, it's wrong. We want to back you up." Jasmine stared at them, a mix of gratitude and disbelief flooding her chest. For weeks, she had been fighting this battle alone, and now, here were her classmates, willing to stand with her. "I don't know what to say," Jasmine admitted, her voice wavering slightly. "You don't have to say anything," Sarah said firmly. "We'll handle it. You're not alone anymore." For the first time in weeks, Jasmine felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Change begins when one voice becomes many. Jasmine's quiet strength had begun to inspire those around her, and together, they would take a stand. The next morning, Jasmine arrived at school with a renewed sense of hope. It had been a long time since she felt like she had any real allies in the fight against Miss Roberts, but now she wasn't alone. Sarah and Aaron had rallied a small group of students who were willing to go with her to the principal, to speak up about the injustice they had all witnessed. As the group gathered outside the principal's office, Jasmine felt her heart race. She wasn't sure what would come of this, whether their voices would be heard or dismissed, but she knew they had to try. The alternative, to stay silent, was no longer an option. When the door to the principal's office opened, the group filed in, their nerves palpable. Mr. Stevens, the school principal, looked up from his desk, his brow furrowing in curiosity. "What brings you all here?" he asked, his tone neutral but inquisitive. Sarah stepped forward first, her voice steady but resolute. "Mr. Stevens, we're here to talk about Miss Roberts. The way she's been treating Jasmine. It's not right." Jasmine held her breath as Aaron spoke next. "She's been singling Jasmine out for weeks, ignoring her, belittling her in front of the class. It's not just unfair. It's racist." The word hung heavy in the air. Mr. Stevens's expression shifted slightly, his attention fully focused on the group now. Jasmine finally spoke, her voice quieter but no less determined. "I've been trying to keep my head down, to do my work, but it's gotten worse. I don't know what to do anymore." Mr. Stevens nodded slowly, his face thoughtful. "I see. This is a serious accusation. Have any of you witnessed this behavior?" The other students nodded, one by one. Jasmine felt a swell of gratitude rise within her. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Finally, her voice was being heard, not just by her classmates but by those in power. Every fight for justice reaches a moment of reckoning. For Jasmine, the question wasn't whether she had the strength to continue, but whether the system would finally stand with her. As Mr. Stevens listened to the students' accounts of what had been happening in Miss Roberts' class, his expression grew more serious. He took notes, asked clarifying questions, and remained calm throughout the conversation. But Jasmine could see in his eyes that he was taking their words to heart. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," Mr. Stevens said at last, setting his pen down. "I take these kinds of concerns very seriously, and I'll be investigating the matter immediately. In the meantime, I'll arrange for a substitute to take over Miss Roberts' classes while we look into this." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the group. It wasn't a resolution yet, but it was a step in the right direction. Jasmine felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, things were finally going to change. Jasmine's resolve grew stronger with every passing day. Each morning as she walked into the classroom, she could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, but she no longer felt the sting of isolation. Instead, she felt empowered, like her every step was a testament to her strength. She knew Miss Roberts would continue to push her, but she was ready. She was prepared to face every insult, every slight, with dignity. One afternoon, as the class worked on a group assignment, Sarah, the quiet girl who had previously apologized to Jasmine, walked over. "Hey, do you want to work together on this?" Sarah's voice was tentative, but genuine. Jasmine smiled, grateful for the small gesture. "Sure, let's do it." They sat together, working through the assignment while the other students watched curiously, unsure of how to react to this new alliance. As the minutes passed, others slowly joined their group, asking Jasmine for her thoughts on a project. For the first time in weeks, she felt like a part of the class. Miss Roberts noticed a shift in the room and her jaw tightened. She stood at the front of the classroom, her eyes flicking from student to student. "All right, class. Let's review what we've worked on," she said, her voice sharper than usual. She called on several students, purposefully ignoring Jasmine, but the class dynamic had shifted. Students who had once followed her lead in excluding Jasmine now hesitated, unsure of how to respond to the teacher's subtle manipulations. After class, Sarah walked with Jasmine to the cafeteria. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, hesitating slightly. "You shouldn't have to deal with all this alone. We need to do something." Jasmine looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" Sarah's expression was serious. "We should talk to the principal. This can't go on." Jasmine was taken aback. She had never considered going to the administration. Part of her had always assumed it wouldn't make a difference, that nothing would change. But now, with a friend by her side, the idea didn't seem so far-fetched. "Maybe you're right," she said slowly. "It's worth a try." That afternoon, they made their way to the principal's office. Mr. King was busy, but his secretary told him they could wait. As they sat in the chairs outside his office, Jasmine's heart pounded. She wasn't sure what she expected to happen, but the idea of standing up to Miss Roberts in such a direct way both terrified and exhilarated her. When they were finally called into the office, Mr. King greeted them warmly. "What brings you two here today?" he asked, gesturing for them to sit down. Jasmine glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she began to explain everything: Miss Roberts' constant belittling, her refusal to acknowledge Jasmine's contributions, the way she twisted every discussion to make her feel small and insignificant. As Jasmine spoke, Mr. King's expression grew more serious. He didn't interrupt, but it was clear he was listening intently. When Jasmine finished, there was a moment of silence. Mr. King leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. "I'm very sorry to hear that this has been your experience, Jasmine," he said finally. "No student should ever feel targeted or excluded in their own classroom. I'll look into this immediately." Jasmine felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had spoken up. Whatever happened next, she knew she had taken the first step toward change. The following day, Jasmine noticed a subtle shift in the classroom. Miss Roberts was quieter than usual, her usual condescending tone was absent, and she seemed distracted. Jasmine couldn't help but wonder if Mr. King had spoken to her. While the class went on as usual, Miss Roberts no longer singled her out for humiliation. Instead, she focused on the lesson at hand, barely making eye contact with Jasmine. During lunch, Sarah caught up with Jasmine, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Do you think she's been told?" Sarah asked. Jasmine shrugged, though she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. "Maybe. Let's see how things go in the next few days." For the first time, Jasmine felt like she had some control over the situation. A week passed without incident, and Jasmine felt the tension slowly lift from her shoulders. She could finally focus on her studies without worrying about Miss Roberts' sharp remarks. The classroom began to feel like a safer space, and other students were warming up to her. Sarah, in particular, had become a close friend, always sitting with Jasmine during group activities and at lunch. One afternoon, while walking home together, Sarah said, "You know, it's not just Miss Roberts who needs to be held accountable. I've been thinking, maybe we could organize something, an event or discussion about racism in the school. What do you think?" Jasmine considered the idea. She knew it was a big step, but it felt like the right thing to do. "Let's do it," she said with determination. The idea of hosting an open discussion about racism spread quickly throughout the school. With the help of Sarah, Jasmine reached out to the student council and other student groups, gaining their support. Mr. King was more than happy to back the initiative, providing them with the resources they needed to organize the event. Jasmine's voice was now being heard, and her efforts to make a change were being embraced. As the day of the discussion approached, Jasmine felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She knew this was bigger than just her experience with Miss Roberts. It was about creating a space where students could share their stories, confront their biases, and work toward building a more inclusive environment. The support from her peers fueled her determination, and she was ready to make a difference. The day of the discussion arrived, and the auditorium was packed with students and teachers alike. Jasmine stood on stage, feeling the weight of the moment. She had prepared a speech, but as she looked out at the sea of faces, she decided to speak from the heart. "We're all here because we want to make our school a better place," she began. "But to do that, we have to be honest about the problems we've been ignoring." As she spoke, the room fell silent. Jasmine shared her experience with Miss Roberts, but she also talked about the broader issue of racism in schools. "This isn't just about one teacher," she said. "It's about a system that allows prejudice to go unchecked. It's about the ways we can all do better." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Jasmine knew this was just the beginning, but it was a powerful first step. In the days following the discussion, the school was buzzing with conversations about racism and inclusivity. The student council began organizing workshops and training sessions for both students and teachers, and Jasmine was asked to help lead some of them. It was a lot of responsibility, but she embraced it wholeheartedly, knowing that change required effort and persistence. Meanwhile, Miss Roberts' behavior became increasingly subdued. She no longer directed her ire at Jasmine, but her cold demeanor hadn't completely vanished. Jasmine wasn't naive enough to believe Miss Roberts had suddenly changed her views, but she took comfort in knowing that the teacher was being watched more closely now. Mr. King had assured Jasmine that he was monitoring the situation, and it gave her peace of mind. Despite the progress being made at school, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. Miss Roberts had been humiliated, but there had been no formal apology, no acknowledgement of the harm she had caused. Jasmine debated whether it was worth pursuing or if it was better to let things lie. She discussed it with Sarah, who supported her whichever path she chose. Ultimately, Jasmine decided that it was important to confront Miss Roberts, not for revenge, but for closure. She approached Mr. King about facilitating a conversation between them, and he agreed. Jasmine knew it wouldn't be easy, but she felt ready to face Miss Roberts one last time. The day of the meeting arrived, and Jasmine found herself sitting across from Miss Roberts in Mr. King's office. The tension in the room was palpable, but Jasmine remained calm. "I'm not here to make you apologize," she began. "I just want to understand why you treated me the way you did. I need to know if you realize the impact it had on me and the other students." Miss Roberts shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly not expecting such a direct approach. I didn't think about it that way," she said, her voice faltering. "I thought I was maintaining order in the classroom." Jasmine shook her head. "No, you were abusing your power. You singled me out because of who I am, and that's not something I can just forget." Miss Roberts didn't offer an apology, but Jasmine could see that her words had struck a chord. After the meeting, Jasmine felt a sense of relief wash over her. Miss Roberts' reaction hadn't been what she had hoped for, but confronting her directly gave Jasmine the closure she needed. She had said her piece, and that was enough. From that moment on, Jasmine felt lighter, more at peace with everything that had happened. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine continued to thrive. Her confidence had grown, and she was now an active leader in the school's diversity and inclusion efforts. The workshops and discussions were making a real difference, and Jasmine could see the changes in her peers. Students were more open, more willing to challenge their own biases, and the school was slowly becoming a more welcoming place for everyone. As the school year progressed, Jasmine's grades soared. With Miss Roberts no longer targeting her, she was able to fully engage in her studies, and her hard work paid off. Her teachers praised her for her insights and dedication, and Jasmine began to believe in herself in a way she never had before. She knew that her success was a direct result of her perseverance, and that gave her an incredible sense of pride. One day, after class, Sarah approached Jasmine with a broad smile on her face. "Guess what?" she said excitedly. "The student council wants to nominate you for an award. It's for leadership and advocacy." Jasmine was taken aback. "Me? Really?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "You've made such a difference here, Jasmine. You deserve it." Jasmine was deeply touched by the nomination, but more than that, she was proud of the impact she had made. Jasmine was honored at the end-of-year award ceremony, where she received the Leadership and Advocacy Award in front of the entire school. As she walked to the stage to accept the award, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. From the shy girl who had once been humiliated by Miss Roberts, to the confident leader standing before her peers, Jasmine's journey had been one of growth and empowerment. In her acceptance speech, Jasmine thanked her friends, her family, and her teachers for their support. But most of all, she thanked her classmates for standing with her, for helping to create a school environment where everyone could feel heard and respected. "This award isn't just for me," she said, her voice strong and clear. It's for all of us. Together, we've made a difference, and I know we'll continue to make our school a better place for everyone. As the summer approached, Jasmine began to think about the future. She had grown so much over the past year, and she felt ready to take on new challenges. She started applying to summer programs focused on leadership and social justice, eager to continue learning and growing. With the support of Mr. King and her teachers, Jasmine was accepted into a prestigious program that would allow her to travel and meet other young leaders from around the country. The thought of leaving home for the summer was both exciting and nerve-wracking, but Jasmine knew it was the right step. She had spent so much time fighting for change at her school, and now she was ready to take that fight to a larger stage. She was determined to make a difference not just in her own community, but in the world at large. The summer leadership program was everything Jasmine had hoped for and more. She met students from all walks of life, each with their own unique experiences and perspectives. Together, they worked on projects that addressed issues like inequality, discrimination, and social justice. Jasmine was inspired by the passion and dedication of her peers, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Throughout the program, Jasmine kept in touch with Sarah, who was eager to hear about all the amazing things she was doing. "It sounds like you're having the time of your life," Sarah said during one of their phone calls. Jasmine smiled. "I am. But I can't wait to bring everything I'm learning back to school in the fall. We've still got a lot of work to do." By the time Jasmine returned home, she was brimming with new ideas and energy. She couldn't wait to share everything she had learned with her friends and classmates. As the new school year began, Jasmine was once again at the forefront of the school's diversity and inclusion efforts, working with the student council to implement new programs and initiatives. One of the first projects she spearheaded was a peer mentorship program, designed to help incoming students adjust to high school life. Jasmine knew firsthand how difficult it could be to navigate the complexities of high school, especially as a student of color. She wanted to create a space where students could support one another and build a sense of community. The program was a huge success, and Jasmine was proud to see her vision come to life. As the year went on, Jasmine continued to thrive both academically and personally. She was excelling in her classes, building stronger relationships with her peers, and becoming more involved in extracurricular activities. Her leadership and advocacy work had earned her the respect of her teachers and classmates, and she felt more confident than ever before. One day, Mr. King called Jasmine into his office for a meeting. "I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of everything you've accomplished," he said, his eyes filled with pride. "You've made a real difference in the school, Jasmine, and I have no doubt that you'll continue to do great things." Jasmine was deeply touched by his words. "Thank you, Mr. King," she said. "But I couldn't have done any of this without your support." Despite the positive changes in the school, Jasmine knew there was still work to be done. There were still students who felt marginalized, still teachers who needed to be held accountable for their actions. Jasmine remained vigilant, always ready to stand up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. One afternoon, Jasmine overheard a conversation between two students in the hallway. They were making derogatory comments about another student's appearance, and Jasmine felt a surge of anger. She knew she couldn't let it slide. "Hey," she said, stepping in front of them. "That's not okay. You need to stop." The students looked startled, but they quickly backed down. Jasmine wasn't afraid to speak up anymore, and she wasn't going to let anyone else be mistreated the way she had been. As the school year progressed, Jasmine's mentorship program gained momentum. More students joined, excited to be part of something that made a tangible difference in the school community. Jasmine worked closely with her peers to ensure the program remained inclusive, welcoming, and supportive of everyone. The bond between the mentors and ments grew, and the school began to feel like a much safer space for all students. One day after a mentorship session, Sarah approached Jasmine, beaming with pride. "You've really started something amazing here, Jasmine," she said. "I can see how much it's helped everyone, including me." Jasmine smiled back, grateful for her friend's support. "It's all of us working together that's making the difference," Jasmine replied. "We're creating the change we want to see, and that's what really matters." With the success of the mentorship program, Jasmine's confidence soared. She was no longer the quiet girl who sat in the back of the classroom, afraid to speak up. Now, she was a leader, someone her classmates looked up to and respected. But with that newfound confidence came new challenges. Some students, particularly those who had sided with Miss Roberts, were not happy with the changes Jasmine had helped bring about. Rumors began to circulate about Jasmine, spread by students who resented her success. They whispered behind her back, trying to undermine her efforts and paint her as overly ambitious or self-righteous. But Jasmine refused to be intimidated. She knew that standing up for what was right would never be easy, but she was prepared to face the backlash. People will always try to tear you down when you're doing something that matters, Mr. King had once told her. His words echoed in her mind as she pressed on, determined to keep moving forward. The rumors reached a boiling point one afternoon when Jasmine overheard a group of students mocking her in the hallway. "She thinks she's so perfect, like she's better than everyone else," one of them sneered. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest, but instead of walking away, she stepped up to them. "If you have something to say about me, say it to my face," Jasmine said calmly, meeting their eyes with unwavering confidence. The students fell silent, their smug expressions replaced with surprise. They hadn't expected Jasmine to confront them directly. "I'm just trying to make this school a better place," Jasmine continued, her voice steady. "If you don't agree with that, that's fine. But spreading rumors and tearing people down isn't going to help anyone." After a long pause, one of the students mumbled an apology. Jasmine didn't need them to like her, but she had earned their respect. Despite the occasional challenges, Jasmine's determination to improve the school environment never wavered. She continued to work with the student council, developing new initiatives aimed at fostering diversity and inclusion. One of the most exciting projects was a cultural awareness event that would showcase the different backgrounds and traditions represented at the school. Jasmine wanted everyone to feel proud of who they were, and this event was the perfect opportunity to celebrate that. As the day of the event approached, Jasmine and her team worked tirelessly to bring everything together. They organized performances, displays, and food from various cultures, ensuring that the event was both educational and fun. On the day of the event, the school gymnasium was packed with students and teachers, all eager to learn and participate. Jasmine stood back and watched as her vision came to life, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. The cultural awareness event was a resounding success. Students from all walks of life shared their stories, food, and traditions, creating a sense of unity that had never been felt at Westfield High before. Jasmine was approached by countless students who thanked her for organizing such an incredible event. "I've never felt so proud to share where I come from," one student told her, tears of gratitude in their eyes. Jasmine's heart swelled with joy. This was what she had been working for, the chance for everyone to feel seen, heard, and valued. After the event, even some of the students who had been critical of her in the past came forward to express their appreciation. "I didn't get it before," one of them admitted, "but I see now why this was important. Thanks for not giving up." Jasmine smiled, knowing that the ripple effect of change was starting to spread. As Jasmine's influence in the school grew, she began to catch the attention of community leaders and local organizations. One day, she received an invitation to speak at a town hall event focused on youth leadership and social justice. Jasmine was honored, but she also felt nervous. Speaking in front of her peers was one thing, but addressing a larger audience filled with adults and community leaders was another challenge entirely. She sought advice from Mr. King, who encouraged her to be herself and speak from the heart, just as she always had. "You've already proven that you're capable of making a difference," he said. "Now it's time to share your story with an even wider audience." With his support, Jasmine prepared for the event, determined to use her platform to inspire others just as she had inspired her school. The town hall event was held in a large auditorium, and when Jasmine walked onto the stage, she was met with a sea of faces looking up at her with anticipation. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and began to speak. "When I first started at Westfield High, I never thought I'd be standing here today," Jasmine began. "I was just trying to get through the school day, trying not to stand out." As she spoke, Jasmine shared her journey, the challenges she had faced with Miss Roberts, the rumors, the doubts, but also the triumphs, the friendships, and the changes she had helped bring about. "I realized that staying silent wasn't going to help anyone," she said. "We all have the power to create change, but it starts with speaking up and standing firm in what we believe in." By the time she finished, the audience was on their feet, applauding her courage and leadership. Jasmine's speech at the town hall sparked a wave of interest in her work, and she was soon invited to speak at other events, both within the school district and beyond. Her story had touched so many people, and she quickly became a role model for students and adults alike. Jasmine's phone buzzed constantly with messages from people who had been inspired by her journey, thanking her for giving them the courage to speak up in their own lives. Despite the praise, Jasmine remained humble, always reminding herself that this was about more than just her. It was about making a lasting impact on her community and beyond. With every event, she grew more confident in her ability to lead and inspire, But she also knew there was still so much work to be done. Jasmine was just getting started. Back at school, Jasmine's popularity continued to grow, but she remained focused on her studies and her mission. One day, during a lunch meeting with the student council, an idea was floated to create a scholarship program for minority students. It could be a way to give back to the community, Sarah suggested. Jasmine loved the idea and immediately began brainstorming ways to make it happen. With the help of the school administration and local businesses, the scholarship program was soon established, providing financial support to students who had demonstrated leadership and a commitment to social justice. Jasmine was thrilled to see how many students applied, and as the first recipients were awarded their scholarships, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She knew that these students would go on to make a difference, just as she had. As graduation approached, Jasmine reflected on the incredible journey she had been on throughout high school. She had faced so many challenges, but each one had only made her stronger. With her friends by her side and the support of the school community, Jasmine had turned her pain into purpose, and she was ready to take on whatever came next. On the day of the graduation ceremony, Jasmine stood proudly in her cap and gown, surrounded by her classmates. As her name was called, she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, feeling an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. She had not only succeeded academically, but she had also left a lasting legacy at Westfield High. As she turned to face the audience, her eyes landed on her father, who was beaming with pride. Jasmine knew this was only the beginning of her journey. After graduation, Jasmine found herself standing at a new crossroads in life. She had been accepted into one of the top universities in the state, with plans to study political science and education. Her goal was clear: to continue advocating for equity and justice, not just in schools but throughout society. As she packed her belongings for the move to college, she felt both excitement and apprehension. She was about to enter a new world, leaving behind the community she had fought so hard to change. Her father, Mr. King, helped her load the last box into the car. "You've already made such a difference here, Jasmine," he said, his voice filled with pride. "I know you're going to do amazing things in college, too." Jasmine smiled, hugging her father tightly. "I'll keep working hard, Dad," she promised. "I won't let up." College life brought new challenges for Jasmine, but it also presented her with fresh opportunities to make an impact. Early in her first semester, she joined the student government, where she quickly made a name for herself as a passionate advocate for inclusion and diversity on campus. While most students admired her determination, some were resistant to change. Jasmine encountered her share of pushback, especially from students and faculty members who were content with the status quo. "Why do we need more diversity programs?" one student asked during a student government meeting. "Isn't everything fine the way it is?" Jasmine took a deep breath before responding. "Everything isn't fine," she said calmly. "There are students here who don't feel welcome or represented. We have to make this campus a place where everyone can thrive." Determined to back her words with action, Jasmine spearheaded a campus-wide initiative to promote inclusion and equity. She organized events that highlighted the cultural diversity of the student body, brought in guest speakers to discuss issues of systemic inequality, and pushed for curriculum reforms that would reflect a broader range of perspectives. Despite her efforts, Jasmine still faced opposition from those who were resistant to change. Some students circulated petitions to shut down her events, while others posted negative comments about her online. It was a harsh reminder that the fight for justice was never easy. But Jasmine refused to be discouraged. She had faced this kind of resistance before, and she knew she could overcome it. As Jasmine's visibility on campus grew, she started receiving invitations to speak at conferences and panels. Her reputation as a passionate advocate for social justice was spreading beyond her university. One day, she received an email from a national organization that focused on educational reform, asking her to deliver the keynote speech at their upcoming conference. Jasmine was both honored and nervous. She knew this was a huge opportunity to reach an even wider audience, but the pressure to deliver a powerful message was daunting. Still, she accepted the invitation, determined to use her platform to continue pushing for change. The day of the conference arrived, and Jasmine stood backstage, listening to the murmur of the crowd as they settled into their seats. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the speech she had prepared. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. When it was her turn to take the stage, Jasmine stepped out into the spotlight, her heart racing. The audience fell silent as she began to speak. "I'm here today because I believe in the power of education to change lives," she started. "But that power can only be fully realized when every student, no matter their background, feels valued and supported. As Jasmine shared her journey from Westfield High to college, the audience listened intently. She spoke about the challenges she had faced, the systemic racism she had encountered, and the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause, and Jasmine knew she had made an impact. After the conference, Jasmine's inbox was flooded with messages from educators, activists, and students who had been moved by her speech. Many of them shared their own stories of discrimination and injustice, thanking Jasmine for giving them the courage to speak up. Jasmine was deeply touched by the outpouring of support, but she also felt the weight of responsibility that came with her growing influence. She knew that her work was far from over. There were still so many barriers to break down, so many voices that needed to be heard. Jasmine made a promise to herself. She would continue fighting for justice, no matter how hard the road ahead might be. Jasmine's speech at the town hall sparked a wave of interest in her work, and she was soon invited to speak at other events, both within the school district and beyond. Her story had touched so many people, and she quickly became a role model for students and adults alike. Jasmine's phone buzzed constantly with messages from people who had been inspired by her journey, thanking her for giving them the courage to speak up in their own lives. Despite the praise, Jasmine remained humble, always reminding herself that this was about more than just her. It was about making a lasting impact on her community and beyond. With every event, she grew more confident in her ability to lead and inspire, but she also knew there was still so much work to be done. Jasmine was just getting started. Back at school, Jasmine's popularity continued to grow, but she remained focused on her studies and her mission. One day, during a lunch meeting with the student council, an idea was floated to create a scholarship program for minority students. It could be a way to give back to the community, Sarah suggested. Jasmine loved the idea and immediately began brainstorming ways to make it happen. With the help of the school administration and local businesses, the scholarship program was soon established, providing financial support to students who had demonstrated leadership and a commitment to social justice. Jasmine was thrilled to see how many students applied, and as the first recipients were awarded their scholarships, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She knew that these students would go on to make a difference, just as she had. As graduation approached, Jasmine reflected on the incredible journey she had been on throughout high school. She had faced so many challenges, but each one had only made her stronger. With her friends by her side and the support of the school community, Jasmine had turned her pain into purpose, and she was ready to take on whatever came next. On the day of the graduation ceremony, Jasmine stood proudly in her cap and gown, surrounded by her classmates. As her name was called, she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, feeling an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. She had not only succeeded academically, but she had also left a lasting legacy at Westfield High. As she turned to face the audience, her eyes landed on her father, who was beaming with pride. Jasmine knew this was only the beginning of her journey. After graduation, Jasmine found herself standing at a new crossroads in life. She had been accepted into one of the top universities in the state, with plans to study political science and education. Her goal was clear: to continue advocating for equity and justice, not just in schools but throughout society. As she packed her belongings for the move to college, she felt both excitement and apprehension. She was about to enter a new world, leaving behind the community she had fought so hard to change. Her father, Mr. King, helped her load the last box into the car. "You've already made such a difference here, Jasmine," he said, his voice filled with pride. "I know you're going to do amazing things in college, too." Jasmine smiled, hugging her father tightly. "I'll keep working hard, Dad," she promised. "I won't let up." College life brought new challenges for Jasmine, but it also presented her with fresh opportunities to make an impact. Early in her first semester, she joined the student government, where she quickly made a name for herself as a passionate advocate for inclusion and diversity on campus. While most students admire her determination, some were resistant to change. Jasmine encountered her share of pushback, especially from students and faculty members who were content with the status quo. "Why do we need more diversity programs?" one student asked during a student government meeting. "Isn't everything fine the way it is?" Jasmine took a deep breath before responding. "Everything isn't fine," she said calmly. "There are students here who don't feel welcome or represented. We have to make this campus a place where everyone can thrive." Determined to back her words with action, Jasmine spearheaded a campus-wide initiative to promote inclusion and equity. She organized events that highlighted the cultural diversity of the student body, brought in guest speakers to discuss issues of systemic inequality, and pushed for curriculum reforms that would reflect a broader range of perspectives. Despite her efforts, Jasmine still faced opposition from those who were resistant to change. Some students circulated petitions to shut down her events, while others posted negative comments about her online. It was a harsh reminder that the fight for justice was never easy. But Jasmine refused to be discouraged. She had faced this kind of resistance before, and she knew she could overcome it. As Jasmine's visibility on campus grew, she started receiving invitations to speak at conferences and panels. Her reputation as a passionate advocate for social justice was spreading beyond her university. One day, she received an email from a national organization that focused on educational reform, asking her to deliver the keynote speech at their upcoming conference. Jasmine was both honored and nervous. She knew this was a huge opportunity to reach an even wider audience, but the pressure to deliver a powerful message was daunting. Still, she accepted the invitation, determined to use her platform to continue pushing for change. The day of the conference arrived, and Jasmine stood backstage, listening to the murmur of the crowd as they settled into their seats. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the speech she had prepared. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. When it was her turn to take the stage, Jasmine stepped out into the spotlight, her heart racing. The audience fell silent as she began to speak. "I'm here today because I believe in the power of education to change lives," she started. But that power can only be fully realized when every student, no matter their background, feels valued and supported. As Jasmine shared her journey from Westfield High to college, the audience listened intently. She spoke about the challenges she had faced, the systemic racism she had encountered, and the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause, and Jasmine knew she had made an impact. After the conference, Jasmine's inbox was flooded with messages from educators, activists, and students who had been moved by her speech. Many of them shared their own stories of discrimination and injustice, thanking Jasmine for giving them the courage to speak up. Jasmine was deeply touched by the outpouring of support, but she also felt the weight of responsibility that came with her growing influence. She knew that her work was far from over. There were still so many barriers to break down, so many voices that needed to be heard. Jasmine made a promise to herself. She would continue fighting for justice, no matter how hard the road ahead might be. Back on campus, Jasmine's leadership role continued to grow. She became the president of the student government and used her position to push for even more changes. She worked closely with the administration to create scholarships for underrepresented students, expand mental health services, and increase the diversity of the faculty. But as Jasmine's power and influence grew, so did the challenges. Some faculty members were resistant to the changes she was advocating for, and a group of students launched a campaign to remove her from her position, accusing her of being too radical. Instead of backing down, Jasmine faced her critics head-on. She held open forums where students and faculty could voice their concerns, and she listened carefully to their feedback. But she never wavered in her commitment to making the university a more inclusive and equitable place. Jasmine's efforts paid off. The university began to implement many of the changes she had advocated for, and the campus climate slowly started to improve. More students of color enrolled, and the administration took steps to diversify the curriculum. Jasmine was proud of the progress they had made, but she knew there was still much more work to be done. One day, as Jasmine walked across campus, a student approached her. "I just wanted to say thank you," the student said. "I never felt like I belonged here before, but because of you, I do now." Jasmine smiled, her heart swelling with pride. This was why she fought so hard, so that every student could feel like they belonged. As Jasmine's junior year of college came to an end, she began to think about her future. She knew she wanted to continue working in the field of education and social justice, but she wasn't sure in what capacity. Should she become a teacher, a lawyer, or perhaps a politician? The possibilities seemed endless, but Jasmine felt the pressure of making the right decision. One evening, she sat down with her father to talk through her options. "You've already made such an impact, Jasmine," Mr. King said. "Whatever you choose to do next, I know you'll continue to make a difference." Jasmine nodded, feeling comforted by her father's words. She didn't have to have all the answers right now. What mattered most was that she continued to follow her passion for justice. That summer, Jasmine interned with a nonprofit organization that focused on educational reform. She worked closely with a team of lawyers and activists who were fighting to dismantle discriminatory policies in schools across the country. The experience opened Jasmine's eyes to the power of the legal system in creating systemic change. By the end of the summer, Jasmine had made her decision. She would go to law school. She wanted to become an education lawyer, fighting for students' rights and working to ensure that every child, regardless of their background, had access to a high-quality education. Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose as she prepared for the next chapter of her life. Underscore 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 underscore. Chapters 46 to 60 will continue to follow Jasmine's journey as she navigates law school, her career in education law, and her continued fight for social justice. The story will explore the challenges she faces, the triumphs she achieves, and the lasting impact she makes on the education system and beyond. Jasmine's first year of law school was as challenging as she had anticipated. The workload was intense, and the competitive atmosphere among her classmates was palpable. But Jasmine wasn't discouraged. She threw herself into her studies, determined to learn everything she could about the legal system and how it could be used to create lasting change in education. Late nights at the library became routine, and while some of her peers were focused on making connections for corporate law positions, Jasmine was singularly focused on her goal, education law. She joined the law school's civil rights clinic, where she worked with real clients facing issues like school segregation and discriminatory policies. It was a humbling and eye-opening experience, and it only fueled her passion further. As the weeks passed, Jasmine found herself grappling with the harsh realities of the legal system. The cases she worked on in the clinic often involved families who were fighting against deeply ingrained institutional racism. Many of these families had been struggling for years with little progress, and it was clear that the legal system moved slowly, too slowly for the children whose futures were at stake. One case in particular left a lasting impression on Jasmine. A mother was fighting for her son, who had been unfairly expelled from school due to discriminatory disciplinary policies. The odds were stacked against her, but Jasmine worked tirelessly with a clinic supervising attorney to build a case. When the case was finally won, Jasmine felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This victory was a reminder that while change might be slow, it was possible. By her second year of law school, Jasmine had become a well-respected figure on campus. She continued her work with the Civil Rights Clinic and was elected president of the school's Public Interest Law Society. Her peers admire her dedication to social justice, and she often found herself mentoring younger students who shared her passion for educational reform. Despite her busy schedule, Jasmine remained in close contact with her father. They spoke often about her progress, and Mr. King continued to be her biggest supporter. "You're doing important work, Jasmine," he would remind her during their conversations. "Keep going, even when it feels like an uphill battle." Those words stayed with Jasmine during the toughest moments. As graduation approached, Jasmine started applying for jobs at non-profit organizations that focused on education law. She had her heart set on working for a civil rights organization that was known for its groundbreaking work in fighting school segregation and advocating for policy reform. But competition for these positions was fierce, and Jasmine knew it wouldn't be easy to land her dream job. One evening, as she was preparing for an interview, Jasmine received an unexpected phone call. It was from one of the attorneys she had worked with during her internship the previous summer. "I've been following your progress," the attorney said. "We have a position opening up, and I think you'd be a perfect fit. Are you interested?" Jasmine's heart raced. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. Jasmine's final semester of law school was a whirlwind of exams, job interviews, and farewells. She accepted the job offer from the civil rights organization, and as graduation day approached, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She was about to step into the real world, where the stakes were higher, and the challenges were greater than anything she had faced in school. On the day of her graduation, Mr. King sat proudly in the audience as Jasmine crossed the stage to receive her diploma. As she looked out at the sea of faces, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for everyone who had supported her along the way. Her journey had been long and difficult, but she knew that it was only just beginning. Jasmine's first few months on the job were intense. She was immediately thrown into high-profile cases that involved school districts across the country. The work was emotionally draining. Many of the families she worked with were desperate for help, and the systemic issues they were fighting against seemed insurmountable at times. But Jasmine had always thrived under pressure. She spent long hours preparing legal briefs, attending hearings, and meeting with clients. The cases were difficult, but Jasmine was relentless in her pursuit of justice. Each victory, no matter how small, reminded her of the reason she had chosen this path. One day, Jasmine was assigned a case that would become one of the most important of her career. A group of students in a predominantly black school district had filed a lawsuit against their district for providing inadequate resources and facilities compared to neighboring, wealthier districts. The case had the potential to set a national precedent, and Jasmine knew the stakes were incredibly high. She worked closely with a team of experienced attorneys, gathering evidence and building a compelling argument. The case received national attention, and Jasmine often found herself fielding questions from the media. It was an enormous responsibility, but Jasmine was ready. As the trial date approached, Jasmine felt the weight of the expectations on her shoulders. The courtroom was packed with journalists, activists, and families who were eager to see justice served. Jasmine had spent months preparing for this moment, and as she delivered her opening statement, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She spoke passionately about the inequities these students faced and the systemic racism that had allowed such disparities to persist for so long. Her words resonated with the jury, and as the trial progressed, it became clear that the case was shifting in their favor. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. The school district was found to have violated the students' constitutional rights by providing them with inadequate resources based on their race and socio-economic status. The victory was monumental, and it sent shockwaves through the education system. Jasmine was overwhelmed with emotion. This case was a landmark ruling that had the potential to change the way schools across the country were funded and operated. She knew that this victory was not just for her clients, but for every student who had been denied an equal education because of systemic racism. In the aftermath of the trial, Jasmine's reputation as a fierce advocate for educational justice grew even stronger. She was invited to speak at conferences, sit on panels, and advise policymakers on how to reform the education system. Despite the accolades, Jasmine remained humble. She knew that the fight was far from over, and there was still so much work to be done. But Jasmine also took time to reflect on how far she had come. From her days at Westfield High, facing discrimination from her teacher, to standing in a courtroom fighting for the rights of marginalized students, her journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been filled with growth and triumph. As Jasmine continued her work, she began to mentor young law students who were passionate about social justice. She wanted to pass on the knowledge and experience she had gained to the next generation of advocates. Jasmine often thought back to her own mentors and how much their guidance had meant to her. One of her ments, a young woman named Leah, reminded Jasmine of herself. Leah was driven, passionate, and unafraid to challenge the status quo. "You've already made such a difference," Jasmine told her one day. "Don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't change the world." As the years went by, Jasmine's impact on the education system became undeniable. She worked on cases that reformed school discipline policies, fought for the rights of special education students, and advocated for more funding for underprivileged schools. Her work helped to level the playing field for students who had been historically marginalized. One day, as Jasmine was preparing for another court appearance, she received a phone call from the dean of her alma mater. "Jasmine, we'd like to honor you with the Distinguished Alumna Award." The dean said, "Your work has inspired so many, and we want to recognize the incredible difference you've made." On the day of the award ceremony, Jasmine stood at the podium, looking out at the audience filled with students, faculty, and family. Her father, Mr. King, sat in the front row, beaming with pride. As Jasmine accepted the award, she reflected on her journey, the struggles, the victories, and the lessons she had learned along the way. "I stand here today because of the people who believed in me," Jasmine said in her speech. "I didn't get here alone, and none of us can create change on our own. It takes a community, a collective effort, to fight for justice. And that's what we must continue to do." As Jasmine's career continued to flourish, she remained deeply committed to her work in education law. But she also began to think about how she could have an even greater impact. She started to consider a career in politics, where she could help shape policies on a larger scale and advocate for systemic reforms that would benefit students across the country. Her decision wasn't made lightly, but Jasmine knew that it was the next logical step in her journey. "I want to create lasting change," she told her father one evening. "And I think I can do that by influencing policy at the highest levels." Years later, Jasmine found herself standing on the steps of the Capitol, having just been sworn in as a congresswoman. Her journey from a high school student facing discrimination to a national leader fighting for educational justice had come full circle. But Jasmine knew that this was not the end of her story, it was just the beginning. As she looked out at the crowd gathered to celebrate her victory, Jasmine felt a deep sense of purpose. She had dedicated her life to fighting for the rights of students, and now she had the platform to make even greater changes. With her father by her side, and the support of the community she had built, Jasmine was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. She had never given up, and she never would. Jasmine King's journey from the back of a high school classroom to the halls of Congress is a reminder of the power of resilience, courage, and never giving up on what's right. She proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, change is possible when you stand up for what you believe in. Her story is a testament to the fact that injustice, no matter how deeply rooted, can be uprooted by those willing to fight back. Jasmine didn't just survive, she thrived. And as she continues her fight for a fairer, more just education system, she reminds us all of one simple truth. When we use our voices, when we refuse to be silenced, we can move mountains. Your story, too, is worth telling, because it has the power to change the world.